morning. Welcome, and thank you for being here. I think everybody, we have any visitors from the community today? No? Okay. So you all, I was going to introduce myself, but you weren't leaving there. I mean, I think I know all of you. But it's my privilege this morning to introduce Bunny. It was my pleasure to serve under Bunny's leadership, both as the head of middle school and as the assistant head of school, and to get to experience her wisdom and wit every day. She's been a valuable mentor to me, a wise teacher, trusted friend, and I'm so pleased that she is able to share some of that with you all today and through this whole series. What a privilege. So thank you for being here, and I'm excited for you all to hear from Bunny today. So
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This really is better than reading the paper. It's just way more fun. I've got both of my cups of coffee here. Let's take a quick count of the ages of your daughters or whatever girls are that you're here to hear about. So I'm curious if we have anybody here with girls in the 0 to 3 age. Okay, 4 to 6. 7 to 10. Good. And 11 to 14. Good. Oh, you guys are right in the thick of it. And 15 to 18. Yes, you've got one back there. Okay. So I am going to concentrate today on those particular ages. There'll be just a little bit when we get started where I talk about being a girl from the get-go, meaning from in the womb. I mean, being a girl from the day that you begin to be flooded by female hormones in the womb, and what that means about the way your brain develops, and what that means about sort of the programming that's in us already for whatever life is going to bring us. Before I do that, I need to say, let me ask you this. Have you come here with specific questions or topics that you would like to hear about? Is there something you want to know before you go home today? Back to the dungeon. Or you just, in general, want to hear whatever? So when I was going through my notes to get ready for today, I thought, man, this is not even close to enough time to tell you everything I want to tell you. So you may sense a little bit of me hurrying as we move through this. There are two things that I have an ending activity that I want to do that will be from 9:45 to 10. And I'm happy to stay after and answer any questions that didn't get answered as we were going along today, because I do feel like there's things I want to tell you, and I don't want you to leave feeling like things were left unanswered that matter to you and your girls and you're right now at your house. The other thing I'm willing to stay around and talk about, if anybody wants to, is I included in your packet some random pages about friends and friendship. These are just copied from social emotional workbooks for kids that you can buy online, and there's lots of good ones. But if you have a girl who's really struggling with friendship and you need some ideas about how to help them find a connection and you wonder if they are making maybe some social mistakes that put them in that way, or if it just happens that the friends haven't shown up yet, that they just aren't in the environment this minute where the right person is, I'm happy to stay and talk a little bit about that, because we're not going to talk about that in the planned time that we have this morning. But some of those handouts might help you, and there's definitely things in there that I could elaborate on if you'd like me to. I will say two things about friendship. One, you need one. You don't need a lot. You don't need a gang. You don't need. You're not a boy. You don't need enough for a team. You need at least a friend you can talk to. You need a friend to learn how to become intimate in conversation and be able to share your secrets, be able to give advice, be able to be trusted, those kinds of things. It doesn't have to be a friend your same age. And a lot of children who struggle with friendship find that they do better with younger or older children. But you do need a friend. And 2, childhood friendships last on the average 12 months. So if you were one of those people who met your best friend when you were in kindergarten and you still talk to her every day, that's very unusual. We grow in different ways at different times, and things happen. And it's very unusual that we stay connected at the same place as time goes on. So that's, if you're worried about that, you can't keep a friend for a long time. It may not be anything except normal growing, and we'll talk more about that if you'd like later. The next thing I want to say is, how many of you were at the iGen conversation a couple weeks ago? So that was a really important conversation, and I based it on this book, which I encourage parents to read. But I want you to keep this in mind today as I'm talking about girls. I'm going to tell you about the psychology and biology of girls and how that affects their social and emotional lives. But this new thing that has happened since 2008 and 2010 on, with the smartphone in everybody's pocket and the social media consuming hours and hours a day of our young girls' lives, this thing is affecting everything I'm going to talk about. It's created this emergency situation almost of girls, teenage girls, young teenage girls being more anxious, more depressed, more suicidal, and staying in the house more, staying connected to family more instead of moving out and around. And because of all the hours that they are consumed by this sometimes hostile world that we're letting them have access to, there are other things they're not doing that create more of a sense of security and more of a sense of happiness. So when you do more of the things that make you unhappy and less of the things that make you happy, at a time when you already were set up to be in near hysterics, of course, that's an emergency. So the book is good. If you want to read it, there's certainly stuff there. And I found it fascinating. But I also want to tell you about the other book that is so good on that topic, because that's not my topic for today. Social Media Wellness is written by Anna Humayon. I'm not sure I'm saying that right. That's a book that Anne Rye and middle school staff have read, and they're going to be doing a book discussion on that, chapters at a time, for all throughout the fall and winter. And so it's going to be a careful examination of that book. And that book really is about the social lives of tweens and teens, and how schools and families and kids can all work together to make a difference. So that's a very, very important series that they're doing. They're also doing a movie called Screenagers. This documentary has been making its way around the country in schools and in front of parents. And it's about the impact of digital media on families and on kids. And it will be screened here October 23rd. And I'll be coming in. I think that would be another really important thing for parents to see, given this cultural shift that our kids are right in the middle of. So please make note of all those things. I'm so thrilled that they're doing that. It's a great book. I've given you this sheaf of papers. We obviously are not going to cover all this, but you can have it to refer to when you want to, and kind of, if I leave out a few things, if I say some kind of a fact, you think, where did that come from, or why? What was she saying? I want you to have some access to it. But we're going to begin on page 6. We'll look at page 5 just for a minute. In the last 2 sessions, or at least last week, I talked about parenting styles, and I gave you a better handout. I gave you a handout that better describes what those parenting styles are. I'm going to tell you that there are a couple times in your life when this right parenting style becomes armor for you. Sometimes kids are in a place where things move smoothly. And sometimes you're in a place where kids they're there and nothing moves smoothly. That's when you really have to rely on your skills as a parent to see yourself and your family through those times. The upper right quadrant, the authoritarian style of parenting, is the one that is proven to be the most successful to raise high-achieving, very stable young people. And that's probably fits very well in the environment that you have your kids here in school, if you have them here.
I think you mean the top left.
Am I saying it right? I do. I mean authoritative. Thank you. Yeah. Balanced parenting. I'm saying, no. It's over here. High expectations, high responsiveness.
Like not low responsiveness.
No, don't go away and say I said that. I did say it, but don't tell anybody. It's kind of that high nurture. When you live in a real technical culture, you need a lot of nurture to soften it up, and that's exactly what high responsiveness and high expectations are all about. What makes it so successful is it's so respectful. Respecting childhood there are groups of people who do that. They're drawn to children, they love children, but respecting childhood is one of the most important things to understand in this growing process. And to know that whenever things happen with your child, whatever stage they move into, whatever fit they throw, whatever success they have, all of these are pieces of the growing process that we're programmed to do. We're programmed to grow and to become. I also put in here a Maslow's Needs chart. I have not talked about that in the last 2 weeks. It's kind of a given when you're working with children that you understand that in our hierarchy of human needs, we have to satisfy the ones at the bottom first. And then as we move up, then we get to the place where, as human beings, we self-actualize and we become. We become who we might want to be. I want you to look at safety needs for just a minute. So the basic needs, obviously. The next level should also be obvious, but when I say we're kind of in an emergency point in our culture, I would say that's where the assault is. The assault that culturally is on the safety needs of our kids. Not that they're being attacked in terms of violence. I hope that they aren't, and if they are, we definitely need to take a look at that. But because they feel like they're under attack. Because they and parents feel like any time you're out of my sight, something could happen. Right? And this is the world we live in. At any moment, somebody might get that gun out, and here we are. They feel that. They know that's where we are as a culture, and they feel our concern about that. So their sense of safety is not there. If we track back to where's the anxiety coming from, where is the stress coming from, where's the depression coming from, it's not feeling safe emotionally or physically. Okay, so that's where we have to pay a lot of attention as parents, is try to figure how can I calm down, and how can I help my children go out into the world in a calm way and feel like there are strangers out there who will help me. I have a whole lot of strangers who will help me stories. I don't think I'll get to them today, but there might be one or two that pop in. Okay, now, if you turn to page 7, I'll kind of begin to get into the things that I want to tell you about. So I began to parent. My first child was born in 1975. My last child was born in 1985. So over that period of the 70s, 80s, 90s, we were parenting. In the 80s, and there was this huge awareness that girls are different than boys, which is hysterical that it took somebody to tell us that. But I was just so determined that my daughter would have experiences that my sons had had growing up, because I wanted her to be empowered by those kinds of experiences. When I was in high school, I was in a college prep track. It was a big public high school. And everybody took the same classes. It's kind of like being in collegiate high school. You take the same classes because if you're going to college, that gets you ready. And then we got to physics. And girls were not enrolled in physics ever, which was fine with me. But my father was a little incensed by this whole thing. I had never known him ever to go to school and say anything to anybody. He was a college president, so he could have. But he went to school, and he insisted that I be enrolled in physics. And his logic was, she's taken all the math that everybody else has, she's taken all the science that everybody else has, and she's going to college. Who knows? She might want to be an engineer, right? But they enrolled me in physics. So 2 other girls followed. So we were in the physics class. That was in the years when you had 30 or 40 kids in a classroom, because we had a lot of kids in my generation. And there were all these boys, and then there I was. And I hated it. I had not a clue what was going on. I mean, I liked playing with ripple tanks and the pendulums and those things, but I didn't get what we were doing. So the teacher paired me with the smartest boy in the class for our projects, thinking that he would get me through. But I always talked him out of what he wanted to answer. So his grades were going down, and my grades were staying at their low. And anyway, I ended up making a deal with the teacher to get out of the class and getting a C instead of an F, and all was well as far as I was concerned. But later, when I had a daughter, I saw my boys play, and when they played with blocks and played with trucks and ran out and climbed things, and I thought, well, no wonder I didn't understand what we were doing. I never did any of those things. So I thought, she's going to do it. So I gave her the blocks, and she'd wrap them in blankets and sing to them, and I'd give her the trucks, and she'd put her little things in the back of the dump truck and go see Grandma. And I mean, I just could not get her to engage in the physical aspects of this play. So I'm thinking, what is the deal? What's going on here? Well, what was going on had so much more to do with her brain than it had to do with the activities that I was putting in front of her. This is not to say that there aren't girls who like to play with trucks and blocks. Of course there are. But she wasn't one of them, and evidently I wasn't one of them either. We've done a lot of brain research since the 1980s, and it is all because of the CAT scans and MRIs that we're able to actually look into the brain when people are thinking and study the brain before they're dead, before we're doing an autopsy. So the progress we've made in brain science and in all of the neurological diseases and disorders has to do with that technology coming about. Well, but these are some of the things that we've learned about girls and that you may notice in your own girls as you parent them. Our brain is made up, has 100 million neurons. That's as many cells as there are stars in the Milky Way. It's unfathomable. It's hard to really think about that. And the brain kind of is designed from the bottom up in terms of the evolution and what goes on in man. So down here in the brain stem are all these instinctual things that we don't think about and we just do, including even things like breathing and in and out and the things that we don't have to think about. And as you go up to the limbic system, then that's where you begin to process emotions. And as you go up further, this is where we process thought. This is highly oversimplified, you understand, but this is kind of the... Now, with boys, when something happens, they may be feeling it. They may feel it here. They may think it here, feel it here. They're very likely to respond from instinctually, fight or flight kind of responses. Quick, get it, fix it, do it, run. Girls are going to process it emotionally and move up to intellectually if they give themselves time, right? So there's actually a difference even in the way that we just respond to the simple stimuli that we encounter every day. And we know that that happens. Girls' brains mature earlier. There's so many ways that girls are stronger than boys from the time that they're conceived on. Girls are not as fragile physically as boys are. Throughout their life, girls are not as fragile emotionally as boys are until recently. This may be changing because of our culture. Girls' language skills are more highly developed. By the time girls and boys, this isn't all girls and all boys. This is when we throw them all together. By the time girls get to first grade, they may know 10,000 more words than the boys do. They begin to process language earlier, use language earlier, add language earlier than most boys do. So they've got language to use this sooner and more often than boys. That also means that for parents that they have a lot to say about, they have a lot of opinion, a lot of planning they'd like to get in the middle of, a lot of organizing they'll do for you. They've got a lot going on that they want to share in a verbal way, even quiet, shy girls. And it also means this little interesting thing. They can tell themselves stories in their head about what's going on around them. Now, when we tell ourselves stories, or when we tell each other stories, sometimes those stories change because we make them better, right? We can tell the story in a way that wasn't exactly what happened, but it really lets you know how I feel about what happened, right? So if I add a few cogent details, then you'll get the point better about what I'm saying. So girls have this ability to talk to themselves about what's going on around them. And if that is influenced by the emotion of the moment, it could end up being not exactly what is going on. It could be way worse than what's going on. Probably not way better, but it could definitely be way worse, especially as we'll talk about as we move from that 10 to 11 and hit puberty. Girls have a whole different set of hormones, and some of those hormones are very helpful to them in the ability to self-soothe and calm down, and especially little girls before the balance gets messed up. Girls have very good memory ability because they practice that part of their brain earlier, I think. But they also have, and that is enhanced when they go through puberty instead of affected in a negative way. It's enhanced so that you take a 14, 15, 16 high school girl, their memory is just exploding in their brain, the memory parts of the brain, and it's really an ideal time for girls to be learning. And so you may think about yourselves as you were in school. You may have been a good student always, but there may have been, you may have sensed a separation between you and the boys as you got a little bit older. And if you did, it wasn't just because you were willing to work harder, and you probably were, but it was also because of this capacity, this jolt to the brain that supercharges the memory at that point. That might actually be a gift that most girls don't even know about. They don't know it's happening. And the reason that they won't is because of the other things that are happening that take center stage, and I'll talk about those. There's a little thing here at the bottom of the page that talks about the stages that girls go through and why that is. You may think that the princess stage, the Disneyland kind of stage, and the costumes for princesses and all what Disney's done to all you may think that that's a relatively new phenomenon, but it is not. This looking around, the fairy tale ideas, the very big, broad strokes of what is it to be a girl and what is it to be a boy, where there's not much differentiation and there's not much nuance to the whole thing. It's all girl, boy. That's always been there. And then by the time the girls get to be from 8 to 12, they begin to get into this kind of giddy, teeny bopper thing, even though they're not teeny boppers, where they begin to have crushes on, singers or somebody. again, it's all part of what's happening in the development that kind of gets us where we're going biologically. But that's not the only thing that we are interested in parents. As parents, we're interested in everything. We want the whole thing to work. But I want to talk to you, so I'm going to focus on this because there is the writers call this a bridge. There's a bridge that goes from childhood. I didn't draw the bridge the way I wanted to. Adolescence. And eventually down here we may get adulthood. We'll see how that works out. And as I talk about this, I'm not going to follow these notes. The notes that are in this section of your handout are from the book called Why Do They Act That Way by David Walsh. It's a fabulous book about emerging adolescence and what's happening completely in the body as you go through that. But these are pretty complete notes for that. But in the interest of time, I'm going to, if you can flip over to the next page, and you'll hear me talking about some of these things, not in any particular order. In the 1980s, there was a woman at Harvard University by the name of Carol Gilligan who was a psychiatrist who was doing research about children. And she had a whole bunch of graduate students who were her researchers who would go out into the field and ask questions and do things, find things out and come back. And then they would put all that data together to try to figure out what does this tell us. And the project she was working on, this is one of those moments in medicine, by the way. The project she was working on was, she was trying to figure out the ethical lives of kids, and at what point are children aware of the difference between right and wrong, and from themselves, that they create their own sense of what's right and what's wrong. So we know when does this happen, what causes it to happen, if it doesn't happen for certain children, and that could cause problems for the rest of us. Is there anything we could do if we knew what was the breakdown? And so they developed all these dilemmas, and the idea was they had schools they would go out to, and they'd talk to boys and girls of different ages at different kinds of schools. So they went to inner city private, they went to inner city public, they went to parochial schools, thinking, we're talking about ethical dilemmas, and maybe these kids have a different kind of upbringing, they might answer differently. Independent schools, all kinds of kids. So they go out, she sends her research assistants out for a 2-week stint. And they talk to hundreds of kids, giving them these dilemmas. And when they come back and start to talk as a group about what they found out, they were really shocked to report to her, the boys and girls don't answer these questions the same way. So this doesn't have anything to do with age. I mean, it may have something to do with age, but what they were noticing was, this is interesting. So let me give you an example. The most famous one was called the Heinz Dilemma. And the Heinz Dilemma is simply this. Heinz has a wife. She gets sick. She is so sick she will die. There is a medicine she could take that will save her. But it costs a lot of money that Heinz doesn't have. So his dilemma is, what do I do? Well, the boys are very clear what Heinz should do. Rob a bank. Heinz got to get that money, and it is just fine if he goes to jail because his wife will be alive. I mean, you shouldn't do it and you're going to be punished, but he's got to save his wife. The girls didn't think that was the thing to do. The girls had different answers, but they were all in the same category, and they were things like, well, we're going to call our friends and have a bake sale. We're going to put an ad in the paper. Heinz's wife needs help. We're going to go down to the pharmacist and see what we can do to get this medicine, maybe pay it out over time. We're going to get help is what we're going to do. We're going to gather together because we can't afford the medicine ourselves, but together we can buy her the medicine. She will be okay. So that was interesting. And they went through the other dilemmas, and they found similar things about each of them. The boys were operating out of what we call the Judeo-Christian kind of ethic, and that is there's a series of laws, and the laws are about what's right to do and what's wrong to do, and if you do something wrong, there's punishment to encourage you to keep doing the things that are right. the girls, they didn't know what to call that. And so they got out all the books, all the other studies about the differences between boys and girls, and all the other studies turned out to be zero. There were no studies of the psychology of girls. All the child psychology had been done on male subjects. All of it. They couldn't find any study. In fact, in a lot of the studies, in the written reports of the studies, where they were talking about the subjects they used, they would say, we chose only boys to keep it not so complicated. You know, they were, well, we know about that. So they'd say, oh, okay, now wait a minute, we got to study girls. That's what we have to do. Forget this justice and this ethical thing. Let's go back and find out does it mean? How do girls grow up? What happens to girls along the way? What are the stages? What are the factors that impact this development? Boys, we've been talking about boys forever, and it was easier to understand. And it was that they were born. This is boys, born. And they start this journey to independence. Autonomy, independence. That is not necessarily the same thing as self-actualization like you see in the Maslow's chart, but what it did mean was along the way they would get to the place where they didn't need anybody else to pay their way, get their home, feed them, take care of their families, when they were able to do it themselves. That's what independence was. Okay, I'm okay now. I'll do it. Right? Now, some boys, they don't all go exactly the same curve, but it was like that. It was in that direction. And that was the sign of success as a parent. The sign of success was, yay, they could take care of themselves. Okay? Well, it turned out that's not at all what girls were doing. From the get-go, what girls were struggling with, and what they were always leaning towards, not independence, but connection. They were always leaning towards more and more connection and more a sense of the circle of people who I'm in this together with. Just think about the answers they gave, right? So the girl's born and takes off on the journey, but the journey really doesn't end when she's able to pay her own way or, get her own apartment or get her own job. The journey's really more about the last thing I want to do is be free from my parents. I may not want them to tell me what to do, but I always want them as part of my life. I don't want to get rid of the rest of the family. I don't want my friends to fall by the wayside. I want this. I want connection. Those are two different paths. Now, in the whole range of human experience, the boy to girl, the girl to whatever it is experience, there aren't very many people out here. Most of us are in here somewhere. So some of this stuff that I'm talking about is a human experience. It's not a girl experience or a boy experience. But I exaggerate it to help you understand the dilemmas that begin to appear for girls as they go through puberty. And why the social media world is such an assault. Because the social media world, you may think, well, now I've got hundreds of friends and all these people are commenting, or I'm watching the lives of all these people. But if you don't feel connected to them, or if they are assaulting you, then this is all messed up. Whatever sense of connection you might have had, let's say you had 2 friends in 6th grade, and you were really good friends, and you were happy, you did things, thought life was fine. But then there were 20 others that you barely knew who were saying bad things about you and out there in the world that everybody could see. All of a sudden, that security of the bond that you had has been disrupted, right? So that is a disruption. A girl who doesn't have a friend, this isn't working, right? That's why this is so important that we think about friendship. But let's talk about what happened to girls. So, girls go along through childhood, here and here especially, And they like school is made for them practically. They like school. They love being around other people. They're learning. They're reading. They're getting stronger and stronger. They're really noticing. They come home. They tell you what color shirt Sam had on and when the teacher coughed. And I mean, they know everything that's going on. They're so interested in it all. By the time they get to be 10, they could pretty much rule the world. And that is not just, I'm not just saying that for effect. I mean, they just have it all together. They've learned a lot. They're smart. They can be very organized. They can be very helpful, but they're definitely very observant. They know how it's supposed to be done, and if you don't do it that way, they're happy to tell you. And then they cross this bridge, and this bridge is puberty. And it doesn't have to, they don't have to be the one going through it, by the way. The effect when the first girl in the class goes through puberty, the rest of the class goes along socially. Right? That's just what happens. Life changes in that group when people start to go through puberty. You don't want to be the first girl who goes through puberty in any group, by the way, and you don't want to be the last boy. We'll talk about boys later. But when they cross the bridge, and everything changes in their body. I've talked about what that is. I will say it again because about half of you haven't heard that, but it'll be quick. When they're crossing the bridge and everything is changing, they're leaving behind something that was really valuable. In many ways, they're leaving her behind, the 10-year-old girl. You know the statue, the Fearless Girl statue that appeared on Wall Street a couple years ago, and the girl standing there, and they've got her facing down the bull, but she could be facing down anything, and she's called Fearless. That's the 10-year-old girl, right? And most of us were her. At some point, most of the women in the room were this girl, okay? We'll come back to her. So when you go through puberty, the body is really programmed. It has been happening younger and younger for girls. And we don't know for sure all the reasons, but there are ideas about what those reasons are. They aren't that interesting to me, but they're interesting to some people. Doesn't matter. It's happening. And the boys' onset of puberty happens as a reaction, seems to happen as a reaction to when the girls are going through puberty, right? So when you do that, the brain explodes into this they call it the blossoming, and there's millions of tendrils that go out that weren't there before. And all this message goes through the body about grow, grow, grow. And and when you to grow, 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 you get all these hormones coming along through the body, and that creates a whole new emotional upheaval. And all of these things, that you want, these experiences you want, these relationships you want, these people you'd like to be like or have them like you or whatever, that becomes intensified as a result of all of this. And so, and for girls, you gain weight. You don't just grow taller like most boys do. You gain a whole layer of fat around your body, maybe 10, 15 pounds, that is 100% essential for having the fat cells necessary to develop your reproductive system. You are not getting fat, but it certainly feels like it. And in the culture that we live in, that's one of the things that parents need to know about the most, so that they don't starve their girls, so that they don't get overweight. At this moment in time, this is not the time to pack carrot sticks, because it's such a horrifying experience. It can be such a horrifying experience. Not only does your skin break out and you put on this layer of fat, this is if you're a girl, put on this layer of fat, you are more likely to need glasses all of a sudden. Your bones are more likely to break. I mean, all of a sudden your body is under construction. And that means you are physically uncomfortable. You're probably going to start having your periods. So now they've got to deal with this particular thing going on. All of these changes. You may have been a real active girl, very much in sports and very much interested in the running around and in the being free. And all of a sudden you're running around with this body, you feel like you're lumbering around. And you don't want people watching you do this. Before, you might have gone up and down the basketball court without much, you didn't even think about it. Now, all of a sudden, you don't want them to see what's happening to you. I tell this story, it just embarrasses my family, but it doesn't embarrass me. It was so true. I was a 7th grader, and the people in my town always seated us alphabetically, which meant you never got away from certain people, and I never got away from Jay Harder, who often sat behind me or in front of me. So I walk into chorus one day. Everybody else was there. I crawl in to my seat, and he's right behind me. And as I'm sitting down, he says in this loud voice, "Bunny, when did your butt get so big?" And I can remember thinking, I don't know. I wondered the same thing. You got me. I don't know how this happened, right? That it doesn't happen in the privacy of your bedroom. Everybody notices. Everybody notices what's happening to your body when this is happening, right? And you don't necessarily like it. You don't like maybe the attention, but you're not sure you like what is happening because it's not the body you're going to end up with as a grown girl or a grown woman, but it is a body that's very different from your 10-year-old body when you felt like you were on top of the world. No matter what, no matter how you started out or where you end up. So the conversation about what's happening to your body, as Jay would be a good example of, that happens all the time in middle school. And it's not always mean. I mean, it's certainly not polite, but it is, how can you not notice, right? How can you not notice what's going on around you? Even the boys are going to notice that. They may not notice a lot, but girls are going to notice it too. And so that happens, and then you begin to have these huge emotional, the movement of your emotions that causes you to be just, the mood swings are just horrific. You may, as a girl, always have been very emotional. You may not have. But now, you probably are going to be. At least you're going to have some periods of time when you are on top of the world 1 minute, and then just a glance, a look, whatever it is, and boom, you just crying in your bedroom or screaming at your mother. I mean, that is just, and this doesn't regulate very fast. I don't know for sure if it regulates completely ever, but for sure it doesn't regulate very fast. And so where you may have, as a little girl, been pretty even, calm, in control of your emotions, you're probably not going to be that much in control now. And a lot of the things that would cause you to be upset are going to happen when you're out in the world, but you can't say anything. That just will make it worse. So you get it all bottled up so that when you get home, it's just this explosion of sorrow and hysteria and whatever else it might be, right? As they cross the bridge and get into adolescence, then they're going through the middle school stage, which is the most dramatic probably. Most kids will go through puberty by the time they're 14 or 15, so most of our kids will have gone through this stage in middle school. So when their emotions are raw, when their metamorphosis is in full flame, they're around each other. None of them are people you should be around, right? But then you put them together with 200 other people doing the same thing, and you're going to see some trouble. I mean, you did when you were in school. I did when I was in school. Very few people go running around saying, God, I wish I could go back to middle school. I mean, it just doesn't happen very often. I kind of liked it, but I don't know why. So this happens. Now, on the other side, so we go through puberty, maybe get out of middle school, and we get over here to what does our adolescence look like? While this research was coming out, and I was raising kids, and I was principal of a high school and a middle school, and I was watching kids every day, I just keep thinking, we got to fix this. There's just got to be a way for us to make it so that these children don't go through such a harsh kinds of things that they go through when this is happening. And I had my eye on some girls who when they came in to middle school as fifth graders, they were fearless girls. They were the kind of girl who could just run the place. I mean, they just could. They just had it going on. And I would visit classes and listen to them answer questions and listen to them talk, and I just think, this girl's going to really be something. I mean, she's probably the first woman president sitting right here. I mean, then there's lots of them, and I'm just thinking, wow, we've got a lot of great girls running around here. But then I keep going to classes, visiting. I get to 8th grade, and she's not saying anything. Or I go over to high school, and not only is she not saying anything, but when the teacher calls on her, now this her could be any of hundreds, but let's call her her. This girl, who may be in AP calculus, and when the teacher calls on her and makes her speak, she always starts with, what this is, well, I'm not sure, but it might be. Well, I don't know for sure. Could it? And the boys are all there. They don't even know the answer. They just want to talk, right? And the girls are, or if you say to this girl who's in all these AP science classes and all these upper level math classes and, top of the class and going to MIT, and when you say to that girl, you're really good at this science and math piece of the curriculum, I'm telling you, there's not a one that will say, I am. They don't. I work hard. My teachers really like me. It would be the way they would claim the gift. It's not about, yeah, this is something I think is really cool. I can't wait to do more of it. Yes. Can you offer a few more math classes? It's a kind of a, that's where you get sad as the adult looking at this. You think, well, what happened to her? What traumatic event did she go through that would cause such a shift in personality and in presence and in confidence? And well, the traumatic event was the one that we all go through, and it's traumatic for girls for sure, and she went through puberty. That's the event. Now, in the research that Gilligan and all these people did, they found out a few things. They heard hundreds and hundreds of bridge stories. They heard hundreds of women talk about, everything was going along great, and then it was almost like I crossed a bridge and went to a different world. I mean, this experience they found was common. In fact, when you talk to grown women, and tell them this, they begin to think, did I feel that way? And pretty soon, you kind of see the eyes light up. So what is the trauma? I mean, most of our growth is growth, but not, is that spelled right? Trauma. Especially if it's, most everybody goes through it, you wouldn't think it was traumatic, you'd think it was normal, right? Here's what happened to those girls, and here's what the trauma appeared to be. Gilligan calls it the silencing, or the loss of voice. And women described it, looking back, they described it this way. I couldn't be who I was. There was this assault on who I was, whether it was chemical or from the other kids or from my parents or my own reaction to it. And so gradually over time, I just kept pushing myself inside. That's called, in psychology, that is the encapsulation of self. That's what you do when you've been through trauma. You push the self down to protect it, in this case protect her, and the more you push down, the more that it becomes encapsulated. So if you've been through some other kind of life experience of trauma and you went to counseling, what they would do in counseling is help you bring it out, bring yourself back, come back to the who you are piece, right? And those kind of those people who have an encapsulated self have been through some kind of traumatic event. But here are all these teenage girls who just went through it just trying to grow up. They weren't hungry. They weren't being beaten. They weren't losing people. They were going through puberty and becoming teenagers in this safe environment, right? Now, what happens to her? What happens to her? What happens to the girl she was? Not every single person does this, by the way. There are girls, excuse me, who are able not, this isn't conscious, it's not like they've decided not to. And I found out that even when you tell girls about this, it doesn't mean they can plan for it and not do it, right? Thank you. This is what happened to her is the response to the experience of going through puberty and becoming an adolescent. She may gain it back faster. Some will gain it back, herself back. Her voice will come back. Her sense of who she is will come back. The real person will come back. But a lot of women who were interviewed in the study said that they didn't see her again until some life crisis. Their husband died, they lost their jobs, somebody got very sick. All of a sudden, she was needed, right? She had to come back to survive, for her family to survive. Something happened. Now, not everybody returns to self in such a dramatic way, but so many women told stories of that. I didn't see her again for decades, and then all of a sudden, I was able to pull her up, And that confidence and that sense of who I am and it's okay who I am and what I have to offer my family and the world and all that returns. Now, this is a sad story. I do not tell you this to depress you. I tell you this because it's an important story, but I also tell you this because in the metamorphosis process, as the girls go from here to here, they need allies. Clearly. They need us as the people in their lives to know what's going on. And we can't talk them out of what's going on, but we have to kind of be the supports that keep them standing and that keep them loved, keep them enclosed in our love and warmth, in spite of the pushing away or the upset or the confusion or the inability we will have to please them. That's going to be short-lived on any given day. They just need to know that we're there with them. I heard someone speaking about, how do you help a child who's overweight, and you're trying to help them get healthy and stay healthy. And in this article there were 10 rules, and one of the rules was, don't tell them they're overweight. Quit talking to them about their weight. Everybody else in the world is. You can provide them with what you feel like is healthy for them, but they don't need more documentation of the problem. Well, we can quit telling them that they are acting, like crazy people. They know that. They don't need more people signing up to say so. So we're going to talk about knowing that this is just sort of a possible piece of growing up female. Then we're going to talk about how do we help guide them through those years. How do we keep the laughter in the house? How do we keep the fun? How do we have something there that brings the level of emotion down, that kind of allows them to come home and breathe? Clearly, the cell phone keeps that emotional level high. Because whatever input they're getting from the world when they're out in the world, if that comes home with them too, then there's no place they're going to go where they aren't being fed, right? Where they aren't being fed the healthy. So that's what we're going to. Any questions about any of this?
So is 10 to 11, is that kind of average now for when they hit puberty?
I don't know what the average would be, but it's not unusual for 10 and 11-years-olds to go through
It
puberty.
seems like when I was younger, it was more like 13.
Yeah. It's been dropping It dropped for a while, almost every 6 months. It seemed, I mean, almost every year it was dropping like about 6 months, but I think it's leveled off. Deanna, do you know?
Well, my 10 and 12-year-old are right in that range.
Yeah, I certainly we know of 10-year-olds. I mean, they would tell, you could hear stories of 8-year-olds, but that would still be outside the norm.
So is there kind of, I mean, do you think there's kind of a compensation that has to be made? I mean, it seems like they're kind of missing the natural process and being quickly advanced into puberty, and they just like emotionally, do you think they're prepared for it? Like they're sort of missing those earlier years that are developing as well?
Well, that's a good point, and I'm sure that's true. Although when Gilligan did the study, the average age would have been 13, so it would have been more like this for the people that they did the study on. But your point is an interesting one, and that but as we know from our other sessions, we're in this period of slow childhood. For a long time, when we were in the long adolescence, we were really seeing 12-year-olds act like teenagers. But now we're seeing 18-year-olds act like middle school kids. So I'm not sure what's happening, because they're still going through puberty, and that hasn't changed. And it'll be really interesting. If you go to that book study with Anne on the social wellness book, it'll be really interesting to think about how has young adolescence changed in the last 6-8 years, and go through that. Yes?
You mentioned that girls are going through puberty on average a lot younger. So I'm curious if you have a child who goes through puberty much later, a girl that goes through puberty much later than her peers, how is that trauma look different? And what can you expect from her?
Well, she'll be very anxious about that. You know, she will be nervous that she hasn't. But in many ways, the other girls will wish they hadn't yet. I mean, there's still this sense of that she's not as far out of sync as those boys are who are so much later. I don't know why for sure. But yeah, anytime you're different. In adolescence, you want to be dead center normal. You want to be like everybody else. The 10-year-old girl could care less, but the adolescent going through puberty, all they want is to be an invisible member of the herd. So anything that makes you stand out, you could be the only redhead in the class, right? Anything that makes you stand out is a cause for alarm, because this is not the period of individuation. This is a period of just let me survive this thing with these other people who are going through it together. I'll think about that, but I actually haven't read anything alarming for that particular group. The most alarming is the first girl.
That's mine.
Yeah. Because everybody not only notices and feels free to talk about, but they immediately, especially the mothers, immediately ascribe sexuality. So that girl becomes a threat. Clearly from no cause of her own, right? And so that there's for sure that girl's going to need a lot of love, a lot of support.
Is it possible? I mean, I know women, like their friends, they often get their cycles come together.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that puberty is triggered by their social group, and if one comes into it, it's kind of triggering the other?
Oh yeah, the first one is the flips the switch.
And then okay.
Thank you, Courtney. Yes. Now, it's not just the body that is causing this whole response. It is, remember, when the brain does this, we've got 4 domains that are going through complete transformation. They are physical, which we've talked about a little bit. They are emotional, social, and intellectual. But the intellectual piece is one of the other pieces that is, this really affects girls. It affects boys in kind of affects us all as humans. Boys, there's almost an empowerment about this because they kind of begin to wake up to the world of school and the future and some other things happening that they were happy not to give any thought to. But for girls, what this means is these millions of possibilities mean is they start looking around at the world with different eyes. So that 10-year-old girl had been told and believed, you can be anything you want to be. You can be president of the United States, right? You can be anything. Your dad and I are here to support you. You're smarter than anybody we know. You go do it, girl. You can do it. But then she's crossed this bridge and she's looking at the world and she's looking at the presidents on the wall. There's no women up there. And she's looking at what's going on in her house. What are dad's duties? What are mom's duties? She's looking at the other people. She just starts looking. And she's thinking, really? Is that really true? Because it doesn't feel like it's true. So the world has changed, and we had hoped in the 80s that the world changing would be this huge thing that would happen. But we kind of forgot about biology and this desire for connection and family, and that to make that happen, that there are other things that become not as important. And so how do you do both? And if you do both, how can you do them both? It's sort of that Wonder Woman works here kind of thought. And girls know full well that there is a preferred sex and that it is boys. From the time boys and girls are playing on the playground at 4 and 5, if a boy messes up, what is he called? A girl. And then those words become more disrespectful as they go on. Pretty soon they're not a girl anymore, they're sissies, and pretty soon they're not sissies anymore, now they're faggots. Then the words just get this horrible stuff, and all that it means is you're not acting like a boy, you're acting way more like a girl. And being a girl, not such a great thing. So girls know all along that the world kind of sees them that way, but they haven't seen themselves that way. But as they go through into adolescence, and especially into college, there begins, even though there are more women in college than men, there's empirical data that should encourage young women, but it doesn't feel that way. It feels like choices I have to make to be happy. Connection. Are choices that compromise other things I thought I was going to be doing. And that's part of I crossed a bridge. I saw the world one way, I crossed a bridge, now I see it a different way. So the intellectual doesn't just mean we're powerful learners and all of a sudden we're really coming into our own academically and with that kind of thing. But it also means that we're beginning to see the world in a whole different way with lots of other complications in it. And it doesn't mean in this place where we live, with these opportunities that our girls have, we think, surely that can't be that discouraging because look what they can do. But it doesn't mean necessarily it's discouraging. It means it's complicated. And here I thought it was going to be just great. But maybe it's just kind of hard. The social and emotional, we've kind of touched on those. And it isn't just the classmates or the parents who take a look at this teenager, this emerging body, and this period the girl's going through differently. Other people look at them too. So I remember one night, my daughter was in 8th grade, I think, and she had been at volleyball practice, so she was still in her volleyball clothes, which are not by any means sexy clothes. And I picked her up, and we went to Dillon's. Thought we might want to eat dinner that night. So got some food. We were standing in line at Dillon's. I was very quickly going through Soap Opera Digest to see what happened on As the World Turns this week. And I glanced up, and there was this just creepy man in the checkout line next to us. And he was just staring at my daughter, just riveted to her body. And I kept trying to figure out what he saw. It wasn't like she was any ravishing beauty. right? It wasn't like she was wearing something interesting. She was just a kid. She was just a girl standing there. And I was just shocked. I mean, I thought, well, how dare, what is going on? But women know they will spend the rest of their lives being stared at that way. I mean, she hadn't even noticed it. The day would come when she would notice that, right? But I noticed it, and I knew that, and not just in a way that was scary because it felt like it was some kind of a, boundary that had been broken, but in a way that's judgmental too. I mean, he didn't seem to have any judgment. He was just really interested. But just always being looked at with some kind of a sense of, maybe you should change that outfit, or, you look a little better than that, or just all of the things that that happen when the gaze gets put on the body, right? We're not talking about what a nice girl you are, what a smart girl you are, how good you've been to me. We're talking about how you look today. And some of that can be a lot scarier than others of that can be. These kinds of things are things that girls don't always talk to us about, especially after the loss of voice, right? They're trying to process it themselves. They're very uncomfortable about it. But also, they can't even imagine that this happened to us. Teenagers don't, they're very they're coming from a very self-centered, a very self-focused place. And so they don't want to embarrass themselves by saying what's happening or acting as if this happened, assuming, of course, that it's only happening to them in the whole world, and they're going to hide this piece. Especially if they're getting any negative feedback. Why would you ever tell your parents that kids think I don't look good, or think that I dress funny, or they don't like me? You have to be pretty desperate to tell mom and dad that. It hurts their feelings even more than it hurts yours. You're not going to, you just guard it. You just guard the negative.
How do you explain to your daughter if she had noticed that man gave me? If she'd asked you, why was he looking at me? How do you explain that without sort of sexualizing?
Any ideas about that?
Because, if like you said, she didn't notice, but she soon will start to notice it. How do you sort of explain that to her? Or do you think she already understands?
Well, I think an 8th grade girl understands that she's been getting comments from the kids in the class since she started to go through puberty. It's not like kids haven't talked about it. It is, and they have words for creeps, and they have words for different kinds of people that they think are out of line in what they're doing. To me, the question was, how did I keep myself from locking her in a room? Heretofore, we live over by Coleman Middle School. Before that night, she left the house and ran to Coleman, ran back. She was free in the world. And after that night, I'm just hoping the guy didn't follow us home. So I'm on guard. Just this whole thing. We are so, we have our responsibility. My responsibility is her. But the fact is, we're all living in this world we're all in the same world. These things are happening all the time, and I think the positive talk about bodies and about what they're for, and about beauty and what it means, what it is, and about the rest of the world, we don't care about them. We just are responsible for what we do, who we are, where we go, if we feel safe. I might have been smart enough to say something like that. I don't know, but probably we just would have talked about the creep. There's creeps everywhere. Stay away from them. They're not worth our time. Just distance yourself, kind of thing. But I don't know. I feel like your question makes me wonder, and I think there must be a better answer than that. But I don't know that I came up with it then. And I had that experience several times with her, but I know she had that experience lots more than when I was there. And so did everybody else in the room. We're women. And that's not to say that our boys don't have other issues going on, but today we're talking about what happens to the girls. So I've told this story before, but the loss of voice piece really is the piece that to me is so sad because it suggests a loss of self. Adolescence is supposed to be about claiming self and finding out that who am I and what is my place in the world. So if the who am I, all of a sudden I get rid of who that is, and my place in the world seems kind of like there's a hostile world out there to me. People aren't good friends, and, creeps are looking at me at Dylan's, and, I've just figured out I'm not going to be the president, and, all these things. Thank you. I can't seem to keep track of my stuff. How do you do that work? How do you do the who am I work when you're doing everything you can to hide who I am, right? And so I think that really becomes the challenge to the parents, is to allow places and ways for the who am I work to continue. So when we're not on the smartphone all the time, the who am I work can continue with all the things that remind us. Voracious readers don't go through this as much as kids who don't read. They spend a lot of those years in other people's lives. So it's kind of this relief from living their own kind of, I think. The sports, if you can keep girls who have been active in sports or find sports they want to become active in, that's a huge encouragement, because not only does it make you healthy and release all of those endorphins so that you feel better and kind of keep everything else under control, fight the depression and get in the sunlight and all that, that's really big. Keeping involved in school, academically, using that brain that all of a sudden is wanting to absorb more than who said what about whom today. Feed it something else. Get them out there helping other people. That living this life now as a 13-year-old is painful. But if I'm not thinking about that, and I'm thinking about helping grandma or, packing boxes of fruit at the food bank or doing other things that make me happy to do, then I'm not focused so much on this. I can get through it easier, smoother. If I'm not, anyway, all of those kinds of things that we've talked about before are things that are really helpful. You have some pages here that have to do with the way we teach girls to communicate and the way girls communicate. With so much about this girl psychology stuff, I wish there were these magic fixes. So if we know girls communicate this way, then let's get this stopped. Let's teach them to communicate otherwise. But the fact is, this is how women communicate too. If you will look at page 14, when girls lose the voice, and by the way, the mean girls never lose their voice. They're always talking up a storm. But when girls lose their voice, and all women do this piece, there's just a lot of nonverbal communication that women and girls become really, really good at. So, class can walk into history, say, and all kinds of stuff can go on in history class that day having to do with history. At the same time, all kinds of stuff can go on in there without a word ever being spoken that's mean. So, you've got one girl who I try to say to so-and-so, do you have some extra paper? And she turns her back to me. She won't even engage. Or she looks over at her friend and rolls her eyes and then looks at me. Or, there's just all these different things that go on all the time between women. You can go to a women's group anywhere and see these same behaviors going on, by the way. This isn't just girls in middle school. And in fact, they may have learned it from each other, but they may have learned it from mom too, right? Because we know we can't say, I'm not talking to you out loud, right? We know we can't say when the teacher's just 10 feet away, we hate you. Right. So, but if we want to say it, if it's coming up, we say it, and the whole class knows it. But the teacher's looking this way, we're looking the other way, right? We don't, and even if the teacher was looking, She would see the eye roll, or she would see the shoulder turn, or she would see those kind of things, but not know the who. What's the triangle? Who are the 6 people in this star? What's the sociological pattern here that's being informed? In order for us to teach our daughters to be able to use their voices, then we have to use ours. So if we're upset about something, we have to say so out loud, where they can see it, so that they see it modeled. Not because they're going to be involved in that, but so they see it happening. If you're in a fight with a friend, your friend has betrayed you, you don't know why they don't call anymore, you're feeling kind of left out, it would be really nice for them to see you call and try to figure out what's going on. Hey, I know something's wrong. I want to get together and talk. I miss you. I'm sick, or I'm so sorry I did this. Let's figure out how I want to fix this. If they don't see the kind of communication that we want them to be having, if they don't see us doing it, then for sure they're not doing it. They may not do it anyway. They live in a hostile environment out there. But this stuff about inside-outside feelings and about the communication, which is body language communication, mean communication, isolating communication, all that kind of stuff, comes from a book called The Curse of the Good Girl. It is the most excellent book about the way girls communicate and how to help them learn to communicate openly and honestly and use their voice. It is the best book for that particular thing. But one of the things that's in The Curse of the Good Girl, if you look on page 13, that is so, I just find this so interesting. Is it Rachel Simmons, Ann? Is she the one that wrote this, Rachel? Yeah. So Rachel Simmons, who has camps for girls, by the way. She has empowerment camps for 7th and 8th grade girls that are really something wonderful. And occasionally we've had parents bring her to town to work with girls or come to school to work with girls, but she seems like she's a kid herself. She's one of those women who's forever young. But one of the exercises she'll do with a group of young teenagers is she'll say, okay, make a list of all the attributes of good girls. Good girls. The top of the page is what they write down. Over and over and over, these are the responses. Blue eyes. Right? No opinions on things. Always busy, organized. Perfect attempt. Facade never cracks. So when you read through that, there are some of these you think, yes, I'm really hopeful. And then there's others you think, what? And so then she'll say, okay, now write down who's a bad girl. And then if you look at the list at the bottom, these are the bad girls. And there definitely are some things on there you probably don't want your daughter to do, but artistic or proud or speaks her mind. It's obvious that the girls pick up that they're supposed to be silent and good and not break rules and look nice and take care of the other people. I mean, it's obvious that we've gotten across some things that we think good girls should be and some things we think bad girls are. But I'm kind of more interested in the bad girl. I mean, a world of people who don't speak their minds and they're all female means that we have a world where just men speak their minds. I mean, the thinking about that gets pretty deep. And if you are interested in learning more about these things, you'll find this in the Rachel Simmons book. On page 16, she talks about how we model these things to our girls. Because we were good girls once ourselves, and now we are working really hard to be perfect moms. So there's a chart this is a chart that's summarizing a whole chapter. So there's much more in the book about this, but it would show you, first of all, how does that woman who's trying to be the perfect mom act at home? And then what is the daughter seeing? when that happens. Compulsive need to straighten the house up. So the daughter has learned that what the image is way more important than what I want to do right now with mom or than other things might be. Rarely makes time for herself. So that the daughter is looking at that thinking, do I have to grow up and do this? Do I have to sacrifice what I want to do for these kids? I have another story about my daughter about that. Another night, I was done at work and I got her at practice. We were driving and it was dark already. It was winter. I was leaving town to go to a conference and I had a whole list of errands that I had to do before I got home so I could leave the family. So we got groceries. We went to the dry cleaners. I got gas in the car and we were headed to pick up medicine at the drugstore. And on our way to the drugstore, she just turned to me and she said, I don't want to do this. I said, well, it's just one more stop, and we're almost done. No. I don't want to be the one who has to leave work in the dark and get groceries, get money at the bank, fill the car with gas, go to the drugstore, I don't want to do that. And I could remember thinking, well, you may not want to now, but I'm guessing someday when you have a family and you want to make sure that they're all taken care of before you leave town, that you'll be out here running around doing these things. But that's what she's seeing. What the messages that I was sending out loud and clear is, when you grow up, you don't ever have to go to bed because it'll take you most of the night to do the things you need to do if you're going to have a career for sure. But it's okay, honey. You don't need sleep, right? I mean, my oldest son tells everybody, I never once saw my mother in bed the whole time I was growing up. And he's saying that, like, good job, Mom, good job. I'm thinking, no wonder that I don't feel good sometimes. I've never got enough sleep, right? So the girls, though, the girls are looking around saying, is this a job description for me? So when we read in iGen that they're not even sure they want to get married and they're fairly ambivalent about having children too, it may be that some of this is coming to fruition. Anyway, I want you to know that there is a resource if you're wondering about this world of weird communication that the girls have going on and how you can help with that. I'd like you to look at page 12 because I know for sure that I've tried to cover more than I could in this short time and that it's been confusing. But I want to talk about a few practical kinds of applications and parent management kinds of pieces. So in the left-hand column here, you have the wrong way to respond to teenage drama, girl teenage drama, or missteps that you can make. And then in the right-hand column, you have the kind of steps where you're actually accessing some wisdom and you're going to try to calm everything down. And just calming everything down and adding a little touch of wisdom will make a difference in your daughter's life. Your teenage daughter doesn't want you to be as crazy as she is, and she doesn't want you to be as mean as the people at school are. And by the people at school, I mean the other kids. You can take heart in knowing that the teachers in our middle school, they actually like middle school kids. They really like middle school kids, and they have lots more experience with middle school kids than any of us did as parents because they just stayed middle school kids for us a little while. Those teachers have been there a long time really working hard on this with kids. So at least you have allies. There's not just other kids when they leave the house. So daughter comes home really, really upset. Maybe she's even crying. And she tries to tell you what's happened, and, it just sounds awful. These other girls have been so mean, or this teacher's been so unfair, or she's failed so badly. Whatever is the hysteria of the day, she is waiting for you to tell, because she would actually like you to wipe the board clean and make everything just fine, please, right now. That world isn't ours to change. We aren't in charge of. who Sally is, or why the Latin teacher wants you to do your homework, or there's all kinds of things that might have triggered this that none of us have any control over. That's theirs to do, right? And though your daughter would love for someone to smack somebody in the face and get this straightened out, that's probably not an option. If there's a real grievance, there may be some recourse in some way. But in general, we as human beings can't control what the rest of the people do. The rest of the people get to control that. We can only control what we do. This lesson is one of the most important lessons for our children to know. You can't control when Sally says something mean, but you can sure decide what you're going to say or do. You get to decide that. And you can decide if you even care. Here's the real trick. Don't talk to Sally anymore. If it bothers you that much, go talk to somebody you've never talked to before. Maybe they're nicer. But teaching that's almost separate from this. So, once we've heard the story, then we just need to stay calm and listen to it. And it may be that our response is, it's obvious that this really upsets you. What do you think you're going to do about it when you get to school tomorrow? How are you going to handle it? 9 times out of 10, she already knows, by the way. So she just wants moral support as much as she wants anything. But if she doesn't know, you can leave it there. Let her think, oh, I'm supposed to come up with a solution. This is on me. And by morning, she will know it may not be brilliant what she's going to do, but she will know how she's planning to face the day, which is what you want her to do. If she can figure out whatever this is, great. The hysteria and the drama will hide the truth, because it doesn't mean something didn't happen. But just the fact that she's in a heightened state of emotion will tell you that she's trying to make sure you know how upset she was about something. The truth of it may not be exactly as it's been said, or she may not even know it. For instance, I get this. This is so typical. The teacher says, everybody hand in your homework. So as the teacher goes and picks it up, I didn't hand mine in. And so the teacher looks at me and says, Bunny, do you have your homework? And when I get home, that teacher is so mean. She embarrassed me in front of all those other people. And she didn't have to do that, right? Well, she just asked if I had it. She didn't, if I had it, she didn't want to not get it. And she didn't say, I'm going to kill you tonight at 4 if I don't have the homework right now. So we have to be careful not to assume that the story itself, with its sadness or with its madness or with its whatever it is, it may not be exactly like it is, but it doesn't matter if it is or isn't. We just have to be calm. And we just have to do what we can just to calm them down so they can think. In love and logic, you love your children enough to require something to happen or to invoke a consequence. But the reason you do that is to give them time to think about what they will do next time so that consequence doesn't happen. It's the thinking part that our calmness and wisdom, and we listen. We certainly want to make sure that we tune into whatever emotion they're feeling, but we have to be the adult. And in that wisdom out of that wisdom will come our values. So yes, maybe Tim, maybe Jay Harder said something mean to me. In fact, he did. Okay? But the solution's probably not for me to go back tomorrow and publicly humiliate him, because that's not part of the value system of our family. That's why we don't like what he did, because we don't think that that's the way people should treat each other. And so we sure aren't going to go do that ourselves, because it's way more important 10 years from now that I become a good person who reflects these values that are so important to us than it is that I learn how to have a real smart alecky comeback to somebody else. That's not really going to serve me very well as an adult. So that's where this wisdom, wise parenting comes in, that reflects our values, right? The poem that I made my kids memorize that I've said to you before, I know, but this would be a situation where I would say this, and then they would roll their eyes at me, and it would be, he drew a circle that left me out, heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in. So, I didn't draw a circle around Jay Harder the next day, although I really didn't. I wasn't offended by that. But that's the kind of, we're trying to help them manage their own emotions and their own lives in ways consistent with our values. And when we need to, we'll get help. But we're not going to tell them, oh my God, what are you going to do? I'm going to, that mean girl. We have to be very careful about that mean girl. I think that's on here somewhere. Become enmeshed and transported. So most of us had middle school experiences. Some of us had horrible ones. So when our middle school kids start to go through these things, it is very easy for it to quickly become about us. Boom, boom. Yes, I spent 4 years with that mean girl, and now this is happening to you. And when that happens, we lose perspective. We don't know that that's what happened to us with so-and-so is what's happening here with so-and-so. And even if we do, haven't we become the adults so that we can parent better than we could be another teenage girl trying to help? That is the problem, by the way. The teenagers all trying to tell each other how to deal with things doesn't work. We don't want to worry too much about our daughter's popularity or being popular. And a lot of times people who worry about this always wanted to be more popular than they were and thought about things like that when they were growing up. We want our daughters to have a friend. We shouldn't be too concerned about having a group of friends, and for sure we shouldn't be too concerned about the right group of friends. Believe me, any friend is the right one, because they are hard to come by in these years, in these 10 to 15, 16 years. We're not formed ourselves, and the rest of the kids aren't either, right? Often, really popular groups are, this isn't always true, and I've noticed at collegiate it's as often not true as it is true, but often the popular group is interesting to the rest of the group because they're doing things that are fringe behaviors, that are more wild or more rule-breaking or a little more on the edge of what you actually want your children to do anyway. So the having them feel like that's who's supposed to be my friends, or that you think that's who's supposed to be my friends, that it's probably really misplaced desire for them to be happy. And it's not a sure thing that they would be happy. Interview for pain. This is the hard one. So last night there was this hysteria, this crying, and these kids have been mean, and they were posting things on social media, and all parents were calling. It was just a mess, right? So now for the next month, every time they go to school, you're just like, oh my God, what's going to happen next? And when you pick them up and you say, how was your day today? What you're really asking is, are they still being mean to you? Is there more of the same? Has this happened again? Pain will come out on its own, especially if it's already been uncovered. But if we ask for it, we're going to get a whole lot more than would ever have been put to words. And sometimes it's when we put it to words that it upsets us. A slight becomes, a pattern becomes mean girls if we talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. I had a woman who had 2 girls in middle school at the same time, and she came in one afternoon just so upset. And she said, I am sick and tired of my girls going through a box of Kleenex on the way home in the car because they're so upset. Now, she lived in Vicarage. She didn't live in McPherson or somewhere. I said, a box of Kleenex? What is going on? We never saw things going on with these girls. And then she would tell me, what they talked about on the way home. And it was just like manufactured angst. It was like, but I want to know, the worst thing that happened to you today, and who saw it, and did it embarrass you, and did it hurt you, and, why didn't that teacher help you? And, I mean, both girls are crying on the way home from school. Now, if there's something like that that's going on, clearly there's reason for lots of support to be brought to bear, but she had nothing to tell me that I could help her with. There was no villain. There was no thing that happened. There was no ongoing kind of issue. It was, by the time the day was over, they're just beside themselves. Well, that's funny. Maybe you should talk about something else besides school when you get in the car. But I think that interviewing for pain, we do that when we're most worried about our kids' fragility. And if they're really in that much pain, I honestly think that you should have someone for them to talk to besides parent. Because if that's really how common the upheaval is, they might need to have some outside person to help them process why they're reacting that way and what they can do about it, and sort out the issues from the reactions and examine them, which is, by the way, a life skill for people who tend to get very, very emotional. It's good for them to learn young what are some coping skills to be able to bring to this particular thing. We don't want to allow ourselves to believe the cover story without a little bit of what's really going on here kind of conversation. Which isn't to say the conversation is, I think you're lying to me. Why do you always lie to me? It's just getting more into the heart of what's really wrong here. And is what's really wrong that you're still mad at us because we won't let you go to the concert, or because you didn't, you didn't get your allowance because you didn't do your chores? I mean, are there other things you're mad about? And so this is the thing that will help you get the sympathy, which we sometimes do. I feel so strongly about this blaming and judging other people, other girls. In my lifetime, if I had picked my kids' friends, I wouldn't have picked the ones that they picked all the time. Sometimes I would have, but often I wouldn't have. But they weren't really my friends, so I didn't really get to pick them. But the thing to keep in mind is that, especially in small communities, it's not like any of our kids have 20 friends, right? So if we give them a list of 10 who are unacceptable ones, then we're down to 10 who may not like our kids, and then we're down to 0. And what I have found is in those characteristics of the bad girl, is that there are definitely times in my lives when my kids have actually needed a friend, more than just I'd like to have a friend, needed a friend. And it's always the tough kids who stand up for you. It's always the kids who have some gumption who come forward and say, hey, what's going on here? And it's important to keep in mind. The other thing is, other parents are looking at your kid. You're not the only one looking at other kids and saying, oh, I don't like that, and she's okay, and I don't like that, and that skirt's too short, and this girl's too mouthy, and that girl had a fight with her mother last year, and we may be seeing that out there, but they're seeing that here too. There aren't any of our middle school kids who are perfect. I don't even know any perfect adults. So the whole idea of judging, especially in the middle school years, it's pretty fraught with problems that lead to trouble for the kids. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to send your kid to spend the night at somebody's house who you think the parenting styles are crazy. It doesn't mean that you have to let your kids do things with kids that you're not ready for them to go do. But it's just that we're not judging people and allowing friendship to really become a friendship. That means something. How do you know if somebody's a friend? It's that what do we call that? Kindred spirit kind of thing. It's that we don't know what that magic is, where we connect like a magnet connect. And it doesn't always happen. We can have lots of acquaintances and not feel that. But when we feel that, all of a sudden, now that's a friend. And that's a friend you're going to talk to 30 years later if you lose touch, and you're going to remember these things that you did and learned together, and that's way more important than whether they have our family's values, because our family's values are in there. When that authentic self comes out, you've done that work. Other families have different values, and unless they're, running a band of thieves or something, you're probably okay. Most of you don't have kids in that later adolescence where they're really getting serious, maybe with boyfriends and girlfriends, and evidently there's less of that going on than ever. But if you do, I would say this, that one of the most important things is that you don't let your kids have too much freedom on their own until you've built some adult-like skills in them so that they can make their own decisions, get themselves home, and stand up for themselves. And you never want, with a girl, in the adolescent years, you never want a very big age gap between the dater and the datee, because the older boys are always wanting to go out with the younger girls for very obvious reasons, and the younger girls are very flattered to be the one in the freshman year that the high school quarterback asked to go to homecoming. But as a parent, that may not be what you want, because you don't want any power differential. When they're learning to be in a relationship, you want your girl to be able to be as important in the relationship as the boy, and to be able to say so and act accordingly. So that's important. Hi, Tom. The last one is that says don't get into these long, heated fights about rules and all this stuff. I mean, it can just absorb so much of the night. But the fact is, once you've said what your expectations are, if there's a consequence involved, just do it. Never say a word. As the conversation gets more and more heated, the more heated they get, and the more you yell back, they're going to outdo you every time, and you're just going to have to keep going up and up, and pretty soon the doors are going to be slammed, and the I hate you are going to be out there, and you're going to be grounding them for a month. Or one of my sons would say, go ahead, ground me for a month. And then my husband would ground him for a month, and then he'd say, how about another month? And then he'd ground him for another month. I've said, hey, I don't want to be home that long. Stop it. But if they come in with a ticket and you take the car keys and say, ask me about this in a month, you don't have to have the fight. They knew it was going to happen. You don't have to involve, it's such a gift to just do it. And shut up about it. Just do it, right? So hard, but such a gift. We're going to finish up with a little quick activity, a story and an activity. But let me ask you if you have any. I know that there are way more questions than we're going to have time for. But what questions might you have before we finish up?
I have a daughter who interprets the way conversations went. I used to think that when she would tell me what happened, that she was lying. And then I started realizing that it was her interpretation in her explanation of what the conversation was. So what's my response to her? Do I help her realize that she's saying the story different than what she heard? Because maybe I heard the same thing, but then she tells me what happened and it's completely different. How do you respond to her?
Well, you might ask some questions like, did Sally always act this? Susie, Mary always act this way? You might, if it's someone that you might just say, let's sit down together and talk through what happened. So you could ask some questions. You could suggest getting together and sorting it out, or you could also point out when you do that, separate from the event. You could say, I was so upset with my friend, and this is what she said to me. But then when I asked her about it and we talked about it, I realized that wasn't what she had said at all. That we had misunderstood, we had miscommunicated. Most of the trouble we have with our friends and in conversations is misunderstandings because of our communication. So it's not that you, honey, are doing something wrong here. This is hard stuff when when we disagree with each other and we're trying to have a conversation. It often happens that we are on different pages. And so then find ways to get back on the same page. But one of the responses is just not to advise based on what she says, right? So, if a friend was mean to her, and so you call the friend's mother and say, we're tired of your little girl being mean to our daughter, would say that you knew you were taking your daughter's word for it. But if you try to just empower her to go back and fix the friendship or find somebody new, then you don't have to validate it, but you're also not making her think you don't trust her or believe her. There's way more of them getting it wrong than them lying. They're getting it, that made them feel a way, and that's what has colored the way they're reporting it too. That's not very helpful, but
The phones too, the middle school kids who have phones, those don't help those situations either, because it allows the situation to just continue to just fester and without resolution, because nobody wants to have that conversation and face it too. So.
Oh, absolutely. Never face to face. It's always with the whole public involved, right?
Yeah. I think we have to encourage them to go have those conversations with their friends and work things out, because a lot of the times it is just something like that where they took something wrong, and then they go and tell all their other friends
how mean she was,
and message. Next thing you know,
50 people are involved.
Nobody's sitting by that kid the next day in class or whatever. It just gets really ugly fast.
Exactly. Really, we couldn't have devised something that would have been more negative for young adolescents. It feeds into every single piece of the growing up process in a negative way.
So kind of on the heels of that, what is the role of school, being a past administrator? A lot of us have seen other classes go before us, and sometimes school gets involved, it works really well. Sometimes school gets involved, but it backfires. What is our role as parents with administrators and teachers? Since our kids are here more than they are at home, so what is that relationship? What is our duty to talk to teachers, or is it better to just work it out at home? And what is...
Well, it's not always better just to work it out at home. It so much depends on the situation. But first of all, the schools are set up to deal with what's right in front of them, right? And so the kids aren't, in middle school anyway, aren't on their smartphones during the day, and so they're not doing that at school. The trouble is their group, that is a group here, goes home and then does things that then affects how they are when they get back to school. There's a limit to what the school can do about that. But the school's always interested in the welfare of kids. So then when you decide as a parent that there's a problem that it's going to take a partnership, you can't deal with it on your own, and it's a bigger issue than you, then it's important to come to the right person at school and to the right list of people. And I think I said this last week, so I apologize for saying things twice to some of you, but the trick is to go to the person who can help. So our tendency is to talk to 30 other people first. So it's sort of like the smartphone phenomenon. I'm having trouble with Mrs. Hill. Have you had trouble with Mrs. Hill? Did your kid have trouble with Mrs. Hill? Did this ever happen to you when he was in Mrs. Hill's class? And pretty soon you've got this big network of people who are your friends. And so what they're going to say is, oh, yeah. They may have had trouble with me or not, but they're not going to say, no, are you crazy? She's a nice person. The conversation becomes we're in this together, so of course there's going to be support, right? So instead of that, which we do as friends but doesn't help, the idea so ideally you go to Mrs. Hill. So then people say, if I go to Mrs. Hill, then she's going to take it out on my kid. Or then she's going to talk to other people and they're going to take it out on my kid. Why would I ever do that? But that's just fearful parenting. That's not what happens. If you come to Mrs. Hill and she does that, then you go to Mr. Davis. But that isn't what happens. People don't become school teachers and middle school teachers and administrators who are looking to find ways to get after your kid. The opposite, right? Now, some of these things, especially the ones with the ripples, they do not go away well easily or overnight. So it may be that you come to me, we work out a plan, I go to the advisor, I even talk to your child and try to figure out even maybe some threads that you may not even know. We try to talk to some other kids, some other parents. We put a plan in effect. we probably, depends what happened, but probably not going to expel 10 kids that day. Because all the kids are, there's nobody without blame. Get rid of the whole school, right? But because it may just be that this kid needs to learn a lesson. You know, this was wrong. Here's what was wrong. Here's what we're going to do about it. So it may be that the next day something else happens. Or the next week something else happens and you think, well, see, I went to Mrs. Hill. We put this plan into effect. Still happened. But then you have to come back because the whole thing that was outlined was, now we're going to make some changes and I'm going to be watching you. And if this happens again, then this is what will be our next step. But if I don't know what happens again, then then it gets worse. It doesn't get better. Then it gets worse. So is there time to go directly to the other parents? Yes, especially if you have a relationship, especially if the parents in the class have gotten together and said, we're sharing information. We are the parents of our kids. We're going to share information, be upfront, all this stuff. If you have a class where that isn't the case, you may not feel comfortable doing that. But let me tell you, if there's trouble, none of us, at home or at school, are going to be able to have the control over it that we once could with the culture we're in now. None of us are going to be 100% successful in this, as long as those kids have those phones and they have access to social media. So we have to figure out how to live in that world, right? And part of it will be that trust. The workshop that Anne's doing on the social wellness media, the book that you're looking at chapter by chapter, is exactly about these issues. It is exactly about how the school and the parents can work together for the safety of the kids. And that will be a place where the parents who are there will be making a plan on how to help each other and the school to help them. So it's definitely an important step. And I know that sounds a lot easier than it is when trouble comes.
Changing the identity from boys to girls and girls to boys, because it's very how can we explain about
So from my limited knowledge about this, a lot of the children, the transgender children who will eventually change their identity and people will find out about it, will report that they've always known, that they've known throughout their childhood, which wouldn't surprise me. Certainly the going through puberty brings all issues of identity up to the front, right? So childhood is a little bit less gender specific, even though we all see the differences. The activity and the interactions and the kinds of friendships can go across the board. But yeah, puberty certainly makes things become more critical, particularly now emotionally, because if you're trying to figure out who am I, and I'm not even who I appear to be, let alone who I long to be and all those things. I think that luckily there's information out there for parents to talk to their kids about. And frankly, the children seem way less confused about it. I'm not sure what that means, but I think just a little bit of conversation goes a long way. I think they want to know what you think about it. They want to know if they were feeling that way, what your response would be. They want to know how to react to it. But once they've kind of got a framework in their own head, they're going to probably move on. Does that even answer your question? I suspect that that difference has been felt very young.
Do you have an idea what happens to the tomboys when they hit puberty? Can you give us a heads up?
So the tomboys are just such a wonderful group of kids. They may find that the boys are less willing to play with them after going through puberty. A lot of times the tomboys get a lot of time on the playground playing soccer and football and basketball. They're one of the chosen ones there. But after going through puberty, they may not be pulled into the boy group as freely to do some of those things that they want to do.
Unique identity issues?
Probably, and some of them, for sure. And some of them will change then. will, as they go through puberty, they'll begin to see themselves as a new person. But no, yeah, probably there will be some other questions that they'll then want to know. How do I fit in? Because in puberty, all of a sudden we are really boy, really girl. And the ones who aren't, what? You know, I mean, we get way out here at the ends. We were kind of in here. We get way out here, and now eventually we're kind of going to, on the human scale, we're going to kind of get back here. But yeah, if you don't want to wear a short skirt to the dance and everybody else is, and you'd like to show up in your pants, that's going to put a spotlight on you, right? At this time when you're trying to just go with the flow. And okay, I went to. Well, I'm not going to be able to. I'll just tell the story. We don't have time for the activity, and then I'll let you go. And if any of you want to stay and ask questions or talk about the friendship papers, we'll do that. So what is the message for our girls? What is the message? We've been giving them the message from 0 to 10. You can be anything. You are so smart. You are so capable. You are so powerful. Wow, I wish I were you, kind of thing. Then what? So what happens next? In some ways, the message is, you are beautiful. You are beautiful inside. You are beautiful outside. You are a creation in our house of God, and it is to be treasured. I have to do everything I can during these years to hold you up while it's a mess, basically. So my daughter wanted to go to a concert. It was Christina Aguilera and Justin Timberlake. We had a rule at our house, we didn't like concerts, so our boys didn't get to go unless they snuck out. We were tired by the time she came along, and so I said, it was in Oklahoma City, so I said, well, I will take you to this concert I really don't want to go to, and I will take you and 2 friends to the concert. So we drive to Oklahoma City. They're in their PJs. They look like the kids out there. I pull into the parking garage in Oklahoma City, and there's this flurry in the car, and I look around, and they've all changed clothes. And they all have on this outfit. They look identical. They've got these short little jean skirts and these frilly little tops and shoes with heels. And I'm saying, what are you doing? Oh, well, this is what you wear. So we go and we leave the parking garage. Here are thousands of people coming. They're all dressed the same way. All these little teeny boppers, all these teenagers. So we go in, then we stand in line to spend money to buy things. Then we go, and Justin Timberlake sings first. That's 2 hours, and then he goes away, and then there's an hour off to buy more things. And I'm ready to go to Wichita, and then Christina Aguilera comes on. And I didn't know much about her, but I was surprised what a beautiful voice she has. So, of course, we stood up the whole time, right? And here I am in the sea of... So she's in all these exotic outfits. She does this song where she's in a cage. I mean, she's got all this stuff, weird makeup, sexy stuff. And then the stage goes dark, and she leaves, and then she comes back. And there's just a single spotlight. And she's in jeans and a T-shirt and athletic shoes, no makeup. And she sits on the edge of the stage, and she sings the You Are Beautiful song. And I put the lyrics back here. I was going to play it for you, but we don't have time for that. But, I mean, it was a moment in my life I will never forget. The audience was riveted. And she just sang and looked. It was like she looked at every girl in that audience. And she says, I'm beautiful no matter what they say. Words can't bring me down. I'm beautiful in every single way. Words can't bring me down. Then she goes back to, we are so beautiful. And in her beautiful voice. And that, when we left, that was the end. And when we left, the auditorium of all those thousands of people, it was just silent. It was kind of like leaving church or something. I mean, it was just, that was the message. That was the reason we were there. That was what it spoke to the girls, who are going to work hard to be beautiful but don't know if they are. But it definitely spoke to me as a mother. And I think no matter what else we learn, that's the message that we give our girls in whatever way we can, is you're beautiful in every way, and none of the rest of the stuff out there should bring you down. So Thank you very much for being here. I'm sorry it was so fast. And I'll hang around if any of you want to, and please feel free to leave.